Every morning begins the same way. You wake up, get ready, go to work, eat, talk to people, then do it all again tomorrow. From the outside, everything seems fine. Responsibilities are handled, bills are paid, life keeps moving. Yet somewhere beneath the routine, a quiet question refuses to disappear. When did life become something you simply manage instead of something you truly live? Nothing dramatic had to happen. It happened slowly, one distraction after another, until one day you look at your own life and realize you've become a stranger to yourself. This is how people quietly lose themselves. Not through one great failure, but through countless moments of neglect. Every time you trade attention for distraction, discipline for comfort, or values for convenience, you drift a little farther from the person you were capable of becoming. The ancient Stoics understood this long before the modern world filled every empty moment with noise. They knew that the greatest danger was never hardship itself. It was allowing hardship, comfort, fear, or the opinions of others to shape your character more than your own principles. Stoicism was never about escaping life's difficulties. It was about becoming the kind of person who remains steady in the middle of them. A person whose mind is no longer ruled by distractions, whose body reflects discipline rather than impulse, and whose heart remains open without becoming fragile. It begins within, and every lasting transformation starts with the quiet decision to rebuild yourself before trying to rebuild your circumstances. The first thing that must be rebuilt is the mind, because every victory and every defeat is experienced there long before either one becomes visible in the world around you. Most people spend their lives believing their greatest obstacles are difficult people, unexpected setbacks, or circumstances beyond their control. The Stoics saw something different. They believed that no outside force has the power to disturb a person as deeply as an undisciplined mind. A storm outside may delay your journey, but a storm within can prevent you from taking the first step at all. That is why the condition of your thoughts deserves more attention than the condition of your surroundings. One shapes your experience, while the other merely presents it. Every day offers countless opportunities to strengthen or weaken the way you think, often without you even noticing. The direction of your life begins quietly, in places no one else can see. Modern life rarely encourages that kind of awareness. It teaches you to react before you reflect. A notification appears, and your attention follows it without resistance. And your emotions begin moving before your reason has even arrived. The news predicts disaster, social media celebrates impossible standards, and endless comparisons slowly convince you that your own life is somehow falling behind. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. None of these influences ask for permission. They simply arrive, and if your mind has no discipline, they settle in as though they belong there. Before long, your thoughts are no longer entirely your own. They become a collection of borrowed fears, borrowed ambitions, and borrowed expectations. The strange part is that this process feels normal because it happens gradually. You do not wake up one morning and decide to surrender your peace. You surrender it one distraction at a time. The Stoics understood that attention is one of the most valuable resources a person possesses, because wherever attention remains, character quietly follows. If your attention is constantly pulled toward things you cannot control, your peace becomes dependent on uncertainty. If it is rooted in what you can influence, your stability grows regardless of what happens around you. This is why Stoicism places so much importance on distinguishing between what belongs to you and what does not. Your thoughts, choices, judgments, and actions belong to you. Other people's opinions, changing circumstances. Yet many people reverse this order. They spend endless energy trying to control the uncontrollable while neglecting the one place where genuine influence actually exists. It is a frustrating way to live because no amount of effort can produce lasting peace when it is invested in the wrong direction. Think about how often your mood changes because of something entirely outside your control. A careless comment from another person lingers in your mind for hours. A delayed opportunity suddenly makes you question your worth. Someone else's success quietly becomes evidence that you are somehow failing. None of these events possess real authority over your inner life until your judgment grants it to them. This was one of the most practical lessons the Stoics offered. Events themselves remain neutral. It is our interpretation that gives them emotional weight. That realization does not eliminate pain or disappointment, but it restores something far more valuable. It reminds you that there is always a space between what happens and how you choose to respond. Within that space lies freedom, and like every meaningful form of freedom, it must be strengthened through practice rather than discovered by accident. This is why rebuilding the mind cannot begin with chasing motivation. Motivation rises and falls with emotion, and emotions naturally change. Discipline grows from something steadier. It grows from repeatedly choosing what is right over what feels immediately comfortable. Some mornings your thoughts will feel calm. Other mornings they will race without invitation. The goal is not to eliminate difficult thoughts altogether, because that is impossible. Even the wisest Stoics admitted that unwanted impressions appear without warning. The difference lies in whether you immediately accept them as truth or calmly examine them before allowing them to shape your actions. A doubtful thought is not a prediction. An angry thought is not your identity. They are visitors, and not every visitor deserves a permanent place in your home. That perspective changes the way you experience everyday life. Instead of treating every passing emotion as a reflection of reality, you begin treating it as information that deserves careful observation. You become less impulsive, not because you no longer feel deeply, but because you recognize that feelings often speak before wisdom has finished thinking. A disciplined mind develops the quiet confidence to pause. That pause may only last a few seconds, yet those few seconds often determine whether a conversation heals or becomes another unnecessary conflict. Whether a setback becomes another excuse or another lesson, whether an ordinary day quietly strengthens your character or weakens it without your awareness. If this way of thinking resonates with you, consider subscribing to return regularly to ideas that sharpen your judgment, strengthen your character, and remind you that the greatest work you will ever do is the work within. Plans still fail, problems still arise. None of those realities disappear simply because you have embraced Stoicism. As Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. What changes is the amount of control those events hold over your peace of mind. You stop treating every inconvenience as a personal attack on your happiness. Instead, you begin asking a quieter question. What kind of person does this moment invite me to become? That single shift redirects your attention away from the event itself and toward the character you are shaping through it. Little by little, your inner world becomes less crowded. The unnecessary noise begins losing its influence because you no longer feed it with constant attention. Clarity returns, not as a sudden breakthrough, but as the result of many small decisions repeated consistently. More careful about the stories you tell yourself, and more willing to release thoughts that offer nothing except anxiety. This is where rebuilding truly begins, not by escaping the world, but by refusing to let the world decide what occupies your mind. Every thought you choose to nourish becomes another brick in the foundation of your future character. Long before your actions reveal who you are, your attention has already made that decision. Once your attention begins returning to you, something else begins to change as well. The constant noise that once filled every quiet moment slowly loses its grip, and in that silence, a deeper question finally has room to appear. If your life is no longer organized around distractions, expectations, and endless reactions, then what is it actually organized around? Many people spend years chasing goals without ever asking that question. They move from one achievement to the next, believing the next promotion, the next purchase, or the next milestone will finally provide a lasting sense of fulfillment. yet every accomplishment eventually becomes ordinary, and the satisfaction they expected fades more quickly than they imagined, because they knew that external success can never permanently satisfy an inner life that lacks direction. Achievement has value, but only when it grows from character instead of replacing it. There is a subtle danger in living only for accomplishments, because accomplishments are temporary by nature. Once one goal is reached, another immediately appears. The finish line keeps moving, and peace remains somewhere in the distance. A person who depends entirely on achievement for self-worth eventually becomes trapped in an endless cycle of proving themselves. There is always someone more successful, more talented, or further ahead. Comparison quietly replaces gratitude, and ambition begins serving insecurity instead of purpose. The Stoics encouraged a different approach. They believed the greatest measure of progress was not how much you possessed, but how faithfully you lived according to your principles. External victories could be celebrated, but they were never allowed to define the value of the individual pursuing them. This way of thinking changes your relationship with success itself. Instead of asking whether your efforts produced immediate rewards, you begin asking whether those efforts reflected the kind of person you hope to become. That question rarely has an easy answer, but it is far more valuable than measuring life through outcomes alone. Sometimes the right decision leads to immediate disappointment. Sometimes integrity costs opportunities that compromise would have secured. Sometimes patience appears less rewarding than impatience in the short term. Yet none of those moments erase the quiet strength gained by remaining loyal to your values. The Stoics believed that virtue carries its own reward, because every honorable action strengthens the one thing that remains with you throughout your entire life: your character. As this perspective settles in, daily challenges begin looking different. Difficult conversations stop feeling like interruptions and start becoming opportunities to practice self-control. Delays become lessons in patience instead of reasons for frustration. Failure becomes information instead of evidence that you are incapable. The circumstances themselves may remain exactly the same, but your relationship with them begins to evolve. Instead of constantly asking why life feels difficult, you begin noticing what each difficulty is revealing about you. Weaknesses that once felt embarrassing become areas where growth is possible. Strengths that once depended on praise become quieter, steadier, and less dependent on recognition from other people. Growth rarely announces itself in dramatic ways. More often, it arrives through changes that almost go unnoticed. You become less reactive when someone misunderstands you. You stop needing every conversation to end with your opinion being accepted. You notice disappointment without allowing it to define your entire day. These shifts may seem small from the outside, yet they represent profound changes within. A stronger character is usually recognized not by louder confidence, but by greater stability. The need to constantly defend yourself begins fading, because your sense of worth no longer depends on winning every argument or impressing every person you meet. There is a quiet freedom in no longer needing to perform for approval. This freedom also changes how you think about the future. Many people postpone becoming the person they want to be until life becomes easier. They tell themselves discipline will come after circumstances improve, or that peace will arrive once enough goals have been achieved. As Seneca wrote, "While we wait for life, life passes." Waiting for ideal conditions only deepens your dependence on conditions that may never arrive. Character is built now, in the middle of imperfect circumstances, through the choices available in the present moment. The future is shaped less by dramatic breakthroughs than by the habits you continue practicing long before the results become visible. When that realization takes root, the goal is no longer to make life easier at every opportunity. The deeper goal becomes becoming stronger, wiser, and more grounded with every decision, allowing each challenge to reveal not your limitations, but the quiet strength that has been growing within you all along. Even the most disciplined mind eventually reaches a point where effort alone no longer feels like enough. You learn to guard your attention, you become more deliberate with your choices, and you begin noticing the difference between reacting and responding. Then something unexpected happens. Resistance appears again, but this time it does not come from the outside world. It rises from within. Old beliefs begin speaking with familiar voices, reminding you of every failure, every disappointment, and every moment when life did not unfold the way you hoped. These thoughts feel convincing because they have been repeated for years. They sound less like opinions and more like facts. That is why they are so difficult to recognize. The greatest obstacles are often the ones that have quietly become part of your identity without your permission. The Stoics understood that people rarely suffer only because of events themselves. They suffer because of the meanings they attach to those events. Two people can experience the same setback and walk away with completely different futures. One concludes that failure proves they are incapable. The other sees the same experience as evidence that growth requires patience. Nothing about the event changes. Only the interpretation does. Yet that interpretation influences every decision that follows. This is why the stories you tell yourself deserve careful attention. Every relationship and every challenge is viewed. If the lens is distorted, reality begins looking distorted as well, even when nothing outside has actually changed. This is where Stoicism offers one of its most practical lessons. Thoughts deserve examination before they deserve agreement. Just because an idea enters your mind does not mean it speaks the truth. A fearful prediction is still only a prediction. A harsh judgment about yourself remains a judgment, not a permanent description of your character. The Stoics encouraged careful observation because they knew that the first impression is not always the wisest one. There is power in creating a small pause between the thought that appears and the belief that follows. Inside that pause, reason has an opportunity to speak. Without it, old assumptions continue directing your life without ever facing honest examination. As old assumptions lose their authority, the world itself starts looking different. Opportunities that once seemed unreachable begin appearing within reach. Conversations become less threatening because your worth is no longer hanging on every outcome. Mistakes become teachers instead of permanent verdicts. You notice that confidence does not arrive because fear disappears. It arrives because fear is no longer allowed to make every important decision. This quiet shift changes more than your thinking. It changes the direction of your life. Every step forward becomes evidence that your past interpretations do not have to determine your future choices. Little by little, the inner conversation changes. The voice that once predicted defeat begins asking for evidence before reaching conclusions. The fear that once demanded obedience becomes something you can acknowledge without automatically following. You realize that your greatest limitation was never the circumstance itself, but the belief that the circumstance had already decided who you were allowed to become. That realization does not erase every obstacle, but it transforms your relationship with them. Instead of seeing barriers everywhere you look, you begin seeing invitations to practice wisdom, patience, and courage. Reveal themselves as habits of thought, and habits can always be replaced by better ones. That is where genuine freedom quietly begins, not through changing the world around you, but through refusing to let yesterday's assumptions continue writing tomorrow's story. As your thinking begins to change, something else quietly starts revealing the truth. Your body becomes a mirror. It reflects whether your new beliefs are genuine convictions or simply comforting ideas that sound inspiring for a few moments before disappearing. It is easy to believe you value discipline while sitting in comfort. It is much harder to prove that belief when the alarm rings before sunrise, when fatigue settles in after a long day, or when every part of you wants to postpone what you already know should be done. This is where philosophy leaves the page and enters ordinary life. The Stoics never viewed the body as separate from the mind, because every action either reinforces or weakens the principles you claim to follow. Thoughts create direction, but actions reveal commitment. Without action, even the noblest ideas slowly become another form of entertainment. The remarkable thing about discipline is that it rarely asks for extraordinary effort all at once. More often, it asks for ordinary effort repeated long enough to become natural. Rising from bed when comfort invites you to remain still, taking a walk when your mind suggests postponing it until tomorrow, choosing nourishing food even when unhealthy options promise immediate satisfaction, sitting down to complete meaningful work before distractions begin claiming your attention. None of these decisions seem impressive on their own. Most people would overlook them completely, yet over weeks, months, and years, they create two entirely different lives. One life is shaped by deliberate choices. The other is shaped by impulses. The difference between them is rarely dramatic in a single day, but it becomes impossible to ignore over time. Motivation, after all, is an unreliable companion. Some mornings it arrives effortlessly. Other days it seems completely absent. If your actions depend entirely upon feeling inspired, consistency becomes impossible. The Stoics placed little faith in emotional momentum because emotions naturally change. They believed that purpose should remain steady even when feelings fluctuate.